Whiteshields. It was not my time. It was my brother's. This was his moment. I was to be left behind, to start my training, to become a guardsman. It was not my time. It was my brother's. This was his moment. I was to be left behind, to start my training, to become a guardsman. He had concluded his time, now pressed his uniform next to me. It had to be at its very best, for tomorrow was the final trooping. The regiments we had raised would all parade before us for the last time. Or we would also see them embark on the transports, but few would actually get to see this. We stood next to each other as we ironed our fatigues. He would look over at my work and sigh and shake his head slowly. I had much to learn, he always told me. But even in this, even in uniform prep, he still maintained the illusion. He was so much better than me. He was now a guardsman. I wasn't even a probie, not even a gun baby, a snot who had not even been through basic. The same day he left, my path would begin. We gave a full year of training to our men here on Semper Paratus, a fortress world. We knew our place. Our purpose. We created warriors. We created armies. And we had done so for millennia. The next day, I stood along the route of the parade in my little uniform, supposedly holding back the crowds. They were there all right, in their throngs as always. For we were always proud of our history, of our part in the Imperium. It was our people who protected the walls of the Empire, our warriors who fought for it. And the cheers were real. The flowers thrown were fresh and expensive. My brother came past at last. He beamed as they all did, chest swelling with pride as I marched around the city. The event took the entire day. We did not slouch in our payment of the tithe. We always over-provided, no matter the number of regiments demanded. And he was in the 5th Regiment, the extra one for the Munitorum and Astra Militarum to deploy. Both of us were tired from standing or marching all day in the blazing heat. We met again afterwards and walked home together for the last time. But then, that is when it happened. It all changed when we walked through the door to our hab. Our parents looked ashen, had fixed grins on their faces, the kind that materialize on parents when they have been interrupted from a large or long argument, or some other tragedy. I had expected all of the attention to be on my brother. He was about to leave after all. Yet it was I who their eyes fixed on. They beckoned me over, communique in hand. My father walked to the table to sit down. This was serious. When I sat, he simply waved over his older son, my brother, to join us, to sit next to me. Was it so I could not see his eyes, see his reaction? My father pushed the letter toward me as he spoke in firm but quiet tones, explaining its contents. And I did not hear him. I could not. I looked at the letter, and my world fell out beneath me. For I could only see the central line, all in bold. My name, my age, my number, and a disembarkation zone and time. Impossible. I held it up to read it again, in full. My father simply repeated himself slowly and calmly. A tiny whine escaped from my mother before she left the room. I had been called up early. An entire year early. I would not even get basic. My brother read it alongside me. His reaction was calm, but telling. He just stared at me. His eyes swam, as did my mind, because I could see it in his wide orbs. He wanted to project comfort, as my father did, but all both reflected was one simple sentiment. You are already dead. I knew it. They knew it. I was going to be what they call a white shield. Oh, we had heard of such things, such units. We had always sneered at those who allowed this. The mobbing up of men and women and simply hurling them at the enemy. Never. Never in all of the time of Semper Paratus had this happened. We had always over-provided. We had always exceeded our tithe. We had always thought this was more than enough. But this time, it was not. My father explained the need, the desperation that our people faced if this had to be done, had been necessary at all. I had no time. None. I would be disembarking on the same transports as my brother tomorrow. We would be trained in transit, is what he had told me, for he had told me much that night. Almost desperate to impart their knowledge, my father and brother had kept me up all night, had assured me I would not need my mind until on ship, so they tried to give me all that they knew in that one night. Impossible, of course. I could not take it all in, but I listened. I absorbed as much as possible. My brother would tell me what to expect in training, my father what to expect in the field. It was not as it was shown in the vids and pics. It was not as it should be. For I had not even earned my rifle, had not even earned my badge. They did their best, getting more frantic as the hours rushed away. But eventually, it had to end. We had to get ready to go. I was tired, and they had smashed my mind with it all. I now felt the first pangs of resentment. Why? Why did the Departamento not tell us before? Did they hide it from us, to reduce possible pushback? Did they hide it from us, so we could not abscond? Or did they simply not know until the transports had arrived what would happen to the world now? For if I had been called up, then surely all of our cohort had. What would happen? Would they reduce the age of intake? Would our world reduce the criteria for next year? For they were taking not only this year's offerings, but next year's too. But soon, activity, bustle and movement prevented me from ruminating more, because it was already time to go. And so we did. Marching out of our building, as was the custom, joined by all of the others from our hab block. We joined the ranks that filed past. He, my brother, in the named regiment. I joined the white streaked lines of the untrained, the Whiteshields. And we were a mess. We could march, of course we could. We could also fire our weapons, of course. We were of a fortress world, but we were not Guard. Not yet. And it showed even in our movements. We were wholly unprepared. I watched as my brother disappeared from sight. I was now on my own. I may never see him again. I would definitely never see my parents again. Well, not unless I was a 1 in a million like my father. But this was the way of things. Regiments never returned. A large part of the year of training would have been in mental conditioning. The things we would face, they would require this. So, I was afraid. Not because I did not know what would happen next, but because I now had a very good idea indeed. And it was everything I had worried about, because they tried to drill us a year's worth of training in a quarter of the time. The ship was a designated transport at the least. Thus we woke every morning, never knowing the time or date as the sun was gone. We travelled through the warp, instructed not to look out of any portholes. And it was hell. You see, they could shift and change corridors, could erect new battlefields every day. Never the same pattern on any consecutive day. And it was hard. We were pushed beyond breaking point by our frantic sergeants. Oh, they were always calm, bellicose and hard, as they should be. But they would often push beyond our limits. The casualty rates were higher than normal, I can tell you that. Live fire exercises were in place too early, is what I thought. But, being frank, it did cut down on those who dragged us all back. We were better for it. But it did not feel as it should. Some of them should have made guardsmen. We barely got to grips with one drill, formation or order, before we had to enact it in detail, in live scenarios. And we learnt fast, but it did not embed as it would over a year. And I was aware of this more than most. Because we had not gone through the mental disciplines for long, not nearly long enough, before we all felt that special lurch, the stomach-shredding knowledge that we had returned to real space. And it was only a week of further transport before we were down there, in the halls of hell itself, on the surface. The war had already begun. Our landing craft had to weather incoming fire, being torn from the skies themselves by these things. I was lucky. My transport got to the surface, but I witnessed the skies, filled with hideous xenos. Small ones that darted down and slew with their guns, some with huge wings that would come down and slaughter men as they disembarked. We were taken underground. Our charge from the lander into the doors, the only moment I could witness the carnage. The bugs. Of all the wars my father had fought, these were the worst, he said. He had returned, because he had been promoted again and again. He was one of the very fewest. He had made sergeant, then become a drill master on our world. 1 in a million. Yet he had told me of the bugs that night, and of all the wars I could be involved in, that this would be the most harrowing. He was not wrong. The next few days were a blur, for we had been moved from one corridor to another, marching our way across what felt like an entire continent, yet always underground. This world was supposed to be a trap, you see, a place the bugs would think easy pickings, but in reality, it had been forged into what the Inquisition had thought would be a death trap for them. As the days merged together, they had been right, of course, the Inquisition, but not in the way intended. for it was a death trap, all right. Ours. Things came out of corridors, floors or sides, bursting out at random and getting in amongst us. Their speed and shredding claws tore us to pieces wherever they erupted. I had the fortune of being at the back of our column near a regular unit when it happened to our lot. We screamed, bellowed orders, curses, hatred, filling the corridor with our noise. We would pull back and attempt to shoot the things, but often kill each other instead. But they pushed past me, the regulars, the ones with a whole year of training or more. They did not run, ever. Even when the things were amongst them, they just fought. Running was pointless, and they knew it. The bugs were always faster, always. So they attached bayonets and a flash and merely engaged them. And in so doing, those behind them could form gun lines, rank up. If the regulars won, no issue. If they were wiped out in close combat, the heathen Xenos would be shot to ribbons by those ranked behind. To my astonishment, I saw the regulars often win brawls with these horrors. The training was all. They saved our lines, us Whiteshields. We were mauled, but not outright massacred. A timely intervention indeed. But it showed how unready we were. The difference those extra months made. And so, we rushed from defence post to defence post, falling back or pushing forward, always underground, always boxed in, always a second away from breaking and running. But, as things go, as the time passed, as the slave stack grew, the tally diminishing our number, we learnt. We fought. We became disciplined. We became veterans. It was Intersection 354 that did it, though, when we were given our due. For 24 hours, we were told, we would have to hold. 354 had a dozen corridors leading from it to it, and all but one of them was a source of potential assault, a danger spike. We set up our nests, brought forward the only heavy weapons we were permitted to deploy, the only ones we had been trained in, las cannons. There was no other unit available, and we were informed by the command staff that there would be no relief for a full day. We had to hold. Had to. And so, we did. We did. The first 6 hours were silent as the grave. The dropping of water, the only sound to resonate in the entire area. Not one of us spoke, for fear of alerting the bugs to our location. Not one, for 6 hours. Then, it began. One corridored first, then another. A few bugs, the little ones, appeared and looked about. We shot their heads off immediately. They were probing. The damn bugs were probing our lines for weakness. Most thought they were just animals, but I knew better. I was astonished at how much of that gabbled rant from my father and brother had actually stuck. I knew better. And they came, not from one place, but from many, all at once. Our lines held, but only barely. They got to our barricades at least 3 times in the first pushes, and when they were amongst us, they ripped us apart, easily. But those behind held and fired into the frays. Some of our colleagues were killed, but not enough to prevent the actions, and not enough to risk the bugs getting into the intersection in numbers. So we held. Only one of all of the squads broke at first contact, but they were shot down by the commissars and officers before they could make a dozen paces. The commissars were ever present, and it was a close thing as to who was more scary, the bugs or the black-clad commissars. Personally, I would rather charge the bugs stripped naked and armless and covered in sauce than face the commissariat. The hours ground away, and the bugs did the same to our numbers. In some alleys the bugs were so thick on the ground that we had to throw in frag grenades to clear a path to fire. And so it went on for the entire 24-hour period. Then, as all looked at their chronometers, it dragged on. Attack after attack. Our las packs were running thin, almost gone. We held for another 4 hours before relief finally arrived. A beaten and bloody unit of regulars marched in with all of their hardware and skill. They immediately took our places on the barricades, but we could see it in their faces as they looked around at the few of us who remained, the bodies of our comrades who had given their ultimate sacrifice for the Emperor. There were so many of us dead. And, despite only being a year or more older, the regulars could be seen wincing at the ages of our fallen, the angelic faces attached to broken corpses. When we were finally ordered to the rear, our commissars led the way as we marched out. But as we did, each and every warrior not on the barricades turned to us, and by the Emperor, they saluted us, one and all. We had done it. Those of us who remained would now be taken into regular regiments. We had bled, we had fought, and we had died. And most of all, we had held. And from that day onwards, we were Whiteshields no more. We were in the Guard now. Welcome, gentle listener, I am Voldemort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and formations of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, we shall be discussing one of the most important units in the Imperial Guard, the Astra Militarum. For this is where many a warrior of the Imperium begins his or her path to glory. Many will scoff, some might titter. The Guard, they say, behind their hands in jest. But the Astra Militarum are no laughing matter, not one jot. The Guard are derided as cannon fodder, scum forced like barely armed children into the maws and jaws of evil. Yet, nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing. It is easy to think poorly of the humble guardsmen when there are beings like Space Marines, the transhuman paragons of war that are more potent than 100 men, the clades of the Chitauri and their irradiated weaponry, or the towering colossi of the Knights and Titans. It is easy to compare these units to the mere mortal baseline human who make up the Guard. Yet this is not how one should look at them at all. Another perspective would be to match them against something far more their speed. And I can assure you, gentle listener, the Guard are based on the formations of the Solar Auxilia and the Imperial Army of the Great Crusade. And that, gentle listener, was designed and codified by the Emperor himself. Now again many will scoff, because the Emperor is hardly infallible. Yet no one who has even a passing acquaintance with the setting can argue that he is not good at one thing: war. His Principia Bellicosa was the forerunner of the Codex Astartes and other documents penned by Guilliman. But Guilliman based so much of it on the experience of the Crusade, what his brothers did, what he did, but also on the bedrock of the Principia. I personally do not deride Guilliman for this, not unless it is purely tongue-in-cheek, of course. But make no bones about it. The Codex Astartes was not Guilliman's musings. It was observations of his and others' actions, but all rested on the knowledge the Emperor had imparted in the first place. It was why Horus was so able, so dangerous, because he had the personal tuition of the Emperor beyond any of his brothers. Hence when the Emperor formed his mortal warriors and armed them, he was not messing about. He had the collected knowledge of all combat and all war, since the days of ancient antiquity to the last moments of the Unification Wars. Every age, every battle, every army that has ever been, he knew of. This was pure, undiluted experience, the like that has never been known before. And every single guard regiment that is trained well, trained correctly, is the product of that experience. It can be difficult to compromise this, again, due to the Astartes, the Space Marines, always grabbing the highlight, the limelight. Yet the Guard are as lethal as humans can get. A squad of Imperial Guard, Astra Militarum, would be better trained and more solid than any force known to man. Our own elites of today, the SEALs, Green Berets and SAS, would be torn asunder by a squad of mere Imperial Guard. And never forget that. Because these forces have never been asked to fight hulking orcs, swarming swift Tyranids, nor undead Necrons. The Guard are an elite formation, amongst even more elite troops. Their numbers and the way that they are used in wars makes them out to be inept. But, as I hope I have demonstrated, this is a fool's idea. For what else could possibly even take to the field of combat of the grim darkness of the far future without breaking and running immediately? First contact would be enough. Yet, despite battling demons, bugs and Eldar, the Guards stand. Now, each culture and world will have their own standards. They will vary wildly, but not when it comes to one thing. One question. Can they fight? And despite the specialities, organizational alterations, or even weaponry in the different regiments, the answer is always the same. You are damn straight they can fight. So when you look at a unit of conscripts, do not think of them as useless or worthless, for they are merely on the first step of the ladder to competence, to becoming a warrior in the greatest army the human race has ever known, the Astra Militarum, the Emperor's own Imperial Guard. I have been Voldemort, your faithful servant. I hope you have enjoyed this brief introduction to the Conscripts, or Whiteshields, of the Imperial Guard. Now, we do have a second channel, GK Natural History, and affiliate links in the description, so go check it out. Thank you for your precious time. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.